Hi everyone, so I thought for our review today for the YouTube video I will complete a PowerPoint on all the theorists that we've covered in the past couple of weeks. I think it's important to review all these now and completing the worksheet. This is just so you can begin to revise. So please just make notes of the different points that we discussed today. It might take you longer than the hour. If it goes up to about 45 minutes and you've not completed, just please make sure you complete this over half term, as this is now going to go towards all your revision that you're going to be doing. So good luck. So as I've said in today's session, we're going to now cover 4 that we've covered in class, and we've covered these in depth, I think, in class, but it's always good to start completing worksheets so you've got these to revise on as we move forward. So we're going to look at part of intellectual development, which is Piaget and Chomsky, and then we're going to go on to emotional development, which is Bowlby and Shaffer and Emerson. So we know that Piaget looks at the cognitive stages of development and schemas, and we know that Noam Chomsky looks at the language acquisition device, which is the LAD. We're then going to go on to Bowlby, which is the theories of attachment, which includes separation anxiety, privation and deprivation. And finally, Shaffer and Emerson, theories of attachment and sequence of attachment. So a typical exam question that you could get potentially asked is the following, and I think we've covered this in lesson as well, but maybe we've reviewed it a couple of times. So Roxy has completed her degree and is now working as a sociology teacher in the local sixth form centre. She's got a 2-year-old daughter called Molly. Piaget developed theoretical models explaining the development of children's logic and reasoning, so outline Piaget's explanation of schemas. So you can have a little go if you want, you don't have to. These are just the types of questions that you could potentially be asked. So in relation to Piaget's schemas, I feel like we have covered these in depth in lesson. We have our equilibrium, your new situation, which is your existing schema. And then you've got disequilibrium, and we've also got assimilation and accommodation. So a schema is a category of knowledge. Okay. Equilibrium is a balance of knowledge in the brain. So a balance of the schema, a balance of the intellectual development. And disequilibrium is an imbalance. Okay. So it could be an imbalance of the schema, an imbalance of the existent knowledge that we already know. Assimilation then is the process in which you incorporate into an existing schema. So, for example, if we have seen a cat and a dog, and a child's never seen a dog before and refers to it as a cat, what will happen then when we're explaining the differences between the dog and a cat is assimilation will take place, and this is when you incorporate into that existing schema. Therefore, leading on to accommodation, that's allowing you to modify a prior schema, okay? Therefore, we will create a new schema within our brain. So that's a process in which it takes place. A schema is not like a box, okay? A schema, according to Piaget, is a category of knowledge as well as the process of acquiring knowledge. A schema is a stage of intellectual development. And an example of a schema is Jack has developed a schema for a cow. He knows that a cow is large and has 4 tails and a leg, and when Jack sees a horse for the first time, he might initially call it a cow as it fits with the schema of a large animal. Once Jack has been told this horse is a different animal, he will modify his existing schema for a cow and create a new schema for a horse. So let's take a quick look of what's going on here, okay? We've seen this example before, but I want you to think at what point is the boy in the equilibrium and then the disequilibrium. Okay, so have a little think yourself. With the key terms that we've covered, but yeah, have a little go. Pause the screen and see what you think. Okay, moving forward. So this is still Piaget's, but links to a different sort of experiment that we've covered. And it's something that I felt like I needed to review, because when I've asked a couple of groups that I've seen, A couple do hesitate to answer, and when I'm talking about the example itself, you go, oh yeah, I do know what it is. So conservation then, that's something appearance may change, but it's the quantity that will stay the same. So Piaget's stages of cognitive development and schemas are two different topics by the same person. So the previous question does not want you to talk about the fourth stage that he theorised, but this is something that you start need to consider. Egocentrism is best described as a young child's inability to see a situation from another person's point of view. They assume that other adults and children see, feel, and hear exactly the same as they do. At nursery, pre-operational children engage in parallel play, so they play alongside rather than together with other children. They are absorbed in their own world, and speech is to externalize their thinking rather than communicate with each other. So Piaget's model, and you'll notice that those two terms we've just discussed are going to come in a little bit further on. So Piaget's model, as well as the schemas, he wanted to provide an understanding of how children develop in their cognitive development. He knows that this is a child's ability to learn and solve problems. And for example, a 2-month-old baby learning to explore the environment with their hands or eyes, or a 5-year-old learning how to solve mathematical problems. Again, we know that it was Piaget who developed this. Okay, so our stages of cognitive development then. His research focused on how children acquire the ability to think, and he came to the conclusion that children think differently to adults. He suggested that a 4-year-old cannot use abstract logic, so which is our abstract logical thinking, because they're not mature enough, no matter how well they're taught. And he observed that infants use egocentric thinking, which means that they can only understand the world from their own perspective. Piaget believed that the ability to logically think does not happen until around the age of 7, when children can use simple logic, which is our concrete logical thinking, to solve problems. For example, the amount of water stays the same when poured into a container. The sensory motor stage then, so these are our stages of cognitive development. So in this stage, we go through what is called object permanence. Infants learn that things continue to exist even if they cannot be seen. Children begin to learn about the world around them through the senses. They realise that their actions can cause things to happen in the world around them. So one of the things we said, if they leave something somewhere, they will potentially may think that it's there where they last put it. Then we have the pre-operational stage. This is ages 2 to 7. So children begin to think symbolically and learn to use words and pictures to represent objects. However, this key term that we've talked about, children at this stage tend to be egocentric and struggle to see the perspective of others. Okay, so go back to what we've learned about egocentric thinking, and you can always link this into your pre-operational stage. So while they're getting a lot better at language and thinking, they think about things in a concrete term. Moving forwards, we have the concrete operational stage, which is 7 to 11. During this stage, children begin to think logically about concrete events. So they begin to understand the concept of conservation. So think about that example that we've covered, that discussion that we said earlier about the theory of conservation. Now they can begin to understand that if a cup is tall, if the water is being poured in from a smaller glass and fits into that tall glass, they've got to be the same, yeah? So the volume and mass can now be integrated into their learning, so they now understand what it is. However, if the example was not shown in front of them, they may struggle to understand that concept, okay? Children begin to use inductive logic or reason from specific information or to a general principle. Lastly, we have our formal operational stage. Now we've got 12 to 18, but realistically it will be 11 plus 12 plus. At this stage, the adolescent or young adult begins to think abstractly and reason about the hypothetical problems. So this is where we said about people may be given a situation that they've not necessarily been through before, but they're able to put a logical explanation to it. They might be able to solve more difficult mathematical problems, even if the solution is not in front of them. So it's about our moral, ethical, social, political issues that require our abstract reasoning. So being a little bit more critical and arguing both sides. There is a link that you can watch in regards to Piaget's theory, so please feel free to add. Lastly, we've got our criticisms. So Brunet was a critic of Piaget's work. One of the critics, anyway, is that there was a small number of children in his study, and this questions the validity of his work. So if it was only on a small number of children, you know, what type of education were they in previously, what environment were they from, etc. Piaget suggests that age or stages he describes may be more fluid than he thought, so maybe he's underestimated or overestimated children's cognitive abilities. Studies show at 5 years old that you do understand others' feelings, so his term of egocentric, okay, maybe a 5 now. He doesn't believe that should be happening, but it can. Bruner did not agree with Piaget's notion of fixed stages. He believes that children will be helped to progress through the stages, and other research suggests that it takes longer than 11 years to become skilled at abstract thinking. Try and pick one or two or three of these, that you feel like you could remember in your exam, because if you've got a 10-mark question, 2 or 3 of these would secure the higher level when you're putting your critics in. A typical exam question there, so if you want to have a go with that, pause the screen now and have a go. Okay, moving on then, we're still on the intellectual category. We have got Noam Chomsky. He believed that our ability to speak is genetically pre-programmed into all individuals. This means that all individuals have the ability to understand and use language regardless of their abilities, and they should become fluent in their first language by the age of 5 or 6. This is where we look at the language acquisition device. So Chomsky states that individuals are born with what we know as an LAD. This is an innate programming in our brain, okay, and enables children to recognize and develop the languages they experience. So according to Chomsky's theory, children are pre-programmed to acquire language. That sentence in itself, if you're talking about Chomsky, pre-programmed to acquire language, and it evolves naturally, it's going to get you your higher mark because you're using key terms that link. In order to acquire language, it evolves naturally in the same way that children have the ability to stand and walk. We have our language ability because it's part of our maturation development. So it's an unfolding of our biological potential, and Chomsky believes that a child could not possibly learn a new language through imitation alone because of grammar and syntax of the language around them is often highly irregular. Carrying on with the language acquisition device, Chomsky believes that an adult's speech is often broken up. They use slang or jargon or ungrammatical sentence construction. Chomsky believes that babies do not need to experience other people using language, but they do need to be trained in order to speak. He noted that even if adults around them use correct grammar or even correct a child, they will apply plural rules, for instance, deers or geeses. Okay, so even if they've been taught that, they still tend to use these specific words. And Chomsky did apply his theory to all languages too, so not just English, it was all nouns, verbs, consonants and vowels. Critics of Chomsky's work then, so again, try and remember 1 or 2 of these. There was a lack of scientific evidence to support his theory, so other theorists such as Bruner, so his name's popped up again, he argued that social interaction is more important than Chomsky let on, so it's critical. It's got more of an influence than what Chomsky suggested. Other people argue that Chomsky put too much emphasis on grammar and sentence structure rather than how children construct meaning from their sentences. One that we discuss regularly in class is Chomsky did not consider children who have disabilities, hearing or speech impairment, and lastly, children with Down syndrome, who are among those whose language is frequently delayed. Typical exam question. If you want to have a go at that, please pause the screen now and complete. Okay, we're moving on to emotional development now. And again, we've covered this in depth in class. Our emotional development is how we feel and value about ourselves and other people. It forms the basis of our emotional literacy and empathy. Emotional development begins with attachment, which an infant forms to their main caregiver. If a child forms a strong attachment to their main caregiver, it can help to ensure a positive self-image and self-esteem. Okay, think about what self-image and self-esteem consist of. Key terms, something that you must be talking about in your exam when you're talking about development. Emotional literacy, the ability to recognise, understand and appropriately express emotions. Emotional literacy is essential for forming positive and social relationships. Empathy, the ability to identify with or understand another's situations or feelings. So walking a mile in someone else's shoes is a term that some people use. Attachment is a strong emotional connection between a child and caregiver. Self-image, the way an individual sees themselves, so the mental image of themselves. And self-esteem, how a person feels about themselves, so their self-worth or pride. We've got a breakdown of the table, so if you want to pause the screen and have a read through these. Okay, the reason we have an attachment to our caregivers is that a child will feel secure, love, and have a sense of belonging. A child needs a caregiver to give them a secure base, and that allows them to explore the world around them. A caregiver is a protector, and they are there to help the child to feel happy, secure, and confident. It is important that parents ensure that children have a physical, mental, and emotional nourishment to develop healthily. Secure attachment in childhood leads to happier and healthier attachments moving forward. If there is lack of healthy attachments, then a mistrust of caregivers or adults in authority could develop. Insecure attachments can lead to behavioural issues, a lack of ability to receive affection, or manipulative behaviour. Children may not develop the secure base necessary to cope with life events moving forward. One theory of attachment that we've covered in class is John Bowlby. John Bowlby refers to attachment as a deep and enduring emotional bond that connects a child to their primary caregiver. So he believes it's an innate attachment that takes place. So it's innate, that key word. Again, he believes that we were biologically pre-programmed to form attachment. He began to consider a child's relationship with their mother, so he linked the importance of social, emotional and cognitive development to the relationship that the child had. And he believed that children were biologically pre-programmed, as I've said, to form attachments, and this is a critical period for forming positive attachment. Again, all this information that he developed allowed Bowlby to consider problems associated with early separation from their primary care. He believed that children go through what we call separation anxiety, and this is an intense distress when separated from their mothers. So a child's distress and anxiety did not disappear even when they were being fed by another carer. Okay, so we believe that that pre-program, the genetic pre-program of attachment to the mother, even if they are being cared for by another carer, they can still have that separation anxiety. He suggested that attachment could be understood as evolving from the caregiver, providing safety and security for the infant. And according to Bowlby, infants have a universal need to seek close proximity with their caregiver when feeling stress or threatened. Now we've got some critics of Bowlby too. Now we don't remember the name of this theorist who is the critic. That's completely fine. Okay. We know that Bowlby looked at also deprivation and privation too. We haven't covered them in this PowerPoint, but we have covered them in class. There's one theorist who believes against Bowlby. So he believes that maternal deprivation in itself may not actually result in long-term problems. He suggests that privation is far more damaging. So we know that privation is when a child has not had the opportunity to form attachment at all. But Bowlby did believe that deprivation is just as difficult for the child to overcome. So while Bowlby believed that attachment is a natural biological process, so this is our nature-nurture debate, others suggest that it is a learned behaviour, okay, and it is influenced by our environment, our culture, and a child's temperament too. This leads us on to Shaffer and Emerson then, and they believe a little bit different to Bowlby. So they still look into emotional development and attachment, but they believe children attach to those who respond effectively to their signals. So this is not necessarily the person they spend most of the time with, it's referred to as who provides responsiveness to their needs. The most important factor in forming attachments, therefore, is not the adult who feeds and changes the baby, but the adult who plays and communicates with them as well. So Shaffer and Emerson believe in a sequence of attachments. So again, those key terms are there. They both link into Bowlby and they both link into Shaffer and Emerson, so you can discuss those. But pause the screen now and consider the different points. Parenting is one of the most important factors that affect children's development, and the way in which parents feel about their child and how they form a relationship is crucial. Babies need strong attachment in order to be emotionally and socially well developed. Children with good attachment are likely to be more confident, have higher self-esteem, and are therefore less likely to show clinginess and demanding behaviour. However, there are several factors that can affect the attachment process. I want you to quickly think about Shaffer and Emerson now, and I want you to develop your own critics of the theory. So think about it saying about people who respond to their needs. Have a little go at thinking of 2 critics of what could be to their theory. Lastly, we've got an exam question that you can have a little go at if you feel confident to do so. You know, this is your revision that you're going to be completing now. Again, another question. Nature versus nurture. So we've started to cover this in class a lot more in depth now. So I'm hoping today's PowerPoint has really helped you define differences between nature and nurture. Please continue to revise over the half term and enjoy your break.